don't have your scandal. It's a piece of advice Hollering Elk gave her fellow online comics artist Pizza Cake Comics about avoiding situations that make your audience turn against you. One offhanded comment, a joke made in poor taste, anything can cause the internet to break out their torches and pitchforks.
Well, time to round up a mob.
It's advice indie comic creator Crazy Gnomenclature, aka Francesca Sundblad, probably could have used before posting her webcomics to Webtoon and especially Reddit.
My main platforms are Reddit and Webtoons, and Insta's kind of a second thought, so if I'm getting trolls, it's through Reddit. But Reddit's sort of the front page of the internet, so you're just going to get anyone who wanders in there. Whereas like Instagram, it's mainly your fans who are engaging with your comic. Reddit, it's literally anyone who's just on Reddit. They're going to see it. You tend to find more people through that way, so Reddit's really good for that, for finding new audiences, but it also just shows it to everyone, and not everyone's going to like your stuff.
I'm sure it comes as no surprise that the comic series about a trans woman and her trans ally roommate would garner more than one case of controversy. But not for the reason you think.
Actually...
Well, also for those reasons, but the transphobia isn't what almost stopped Tiff Eve forever. There was one particular comic that brought Sundblad to a grinding halt, and made her reconsider the future of the entire series.
If I hadn't done that, I'm not entirely sure if Tiff Eve, would still be around.
But it didn't all come crashing down at once. The pressure built over time, from general harassment to targeted issues with the comic and characters, before reaching critical mass. Welcome to the Zombie Comics channel, I'm your host Ara.
Hi, I'm Fran Sundblad and I draw Tiff Eve.
We're back again because, well, ask and you shall receive. Also, hey, I have a Ko-fi now. I'm working on a Patreon, so I'll keep you updated about that. I'm thinking people might like to hear full interviews with artists and other behind-the-scenes things, so let me know if anything like that sounds interesting to you. The community surrounding the comic artists over on our comics is usually a positive one, but it is on the internet, so you know there's drama to be had. I mean, my channel received its first boost because every artist and their brother started responding to Pizza Cake's comic, lamenting all the hate she gets. It seems every popular artist is doomed to run into something, and it usually goes beyond the generic hate train, being a unique situation every time. Red Dot gets harassed when she doesn't do a comic with spicy humor. I've seen Portuguese Geese get comments about his art style. Hell, Hollering Elk's big scandal was because a panel's framing wasn't clear, and a couple sarcastic comments snowballed into a big thing. Sundblad and Tiff Eve are no exceptions. They've just run into more than their fair share because they discuss hot-button topics in practically every comic. Like, let's see. Comic 1, anti-trans sentiment. Comic 3, dead names. Comic 5, corporate LGBT support. Comic 6, sexism. I think maybe just incel behavior. I can't keep my terminology straight anymore. The point is, boiling culture-wide issues and discussions down to 4-panel comics innately runs the risk of misunderstanding, backlash, and hateful comments. Luckily, we have moderators. And the R-Comics mods have been good about catching the hateful comics and deleting them because it's one thing to criticize art or discuss the themes of a comic, it's another to spout transphobic words and death threats. Unluckily, that just means they have to get creative with how they send these messages, and oh boy do they.
I just try to think creatively.
You occasionally just get the comments that thankfully the mods delete, where they'll call me he, or they'll call Tiff he, or they'll call Eve he, which doesn't even work with the insult they're trying to convey. Oh, I got one that I thought they were just pounding randomly on their keyboard. And then I Googled it really quick, and it turned out to be an acronym for you will never be a woman, you don't have a womb. Which, yeah, you're being an absolute asshole to trans people, but you know what? That's fucking sexist. What, a woman's worth is only if she can give birth? Screw you.
And then there's the Reddit Care Resources Crisis Bot. Users are able to call in a Reddit bot if they believe someone is Can I say that on YouTube? Basically, it's meant to be a hotline for people to report at-risk users. It's a good thought, but this is Reddit, and so something like that isn't going to be used for its intended purposes. All too often, well, Tiff and Eve literally have an entire response comic about how it's usually used.
It was entitled Unfortunately Common. I guess it is a response comic. I didn't really think of it like that at the time. Since the very first Tiff and Eve I started posting, I was getting a Reddit cares, and I was weirded out at first. I didn't understand it, and then I realized what the real message was behind it, which is, go kill yourself. At the beginning of Tiff and Eve, even though Tiff and Eve wasn't very popular, I was getting those probably 2 to 3 times a week. It's kind of disheartening to see, ooh, I've got a message, and it's a message telling me I need to die. Well, I didn't need that today. I don't remember what broke the camel's back. I think it's just I thought of the comic. I thought of the line that the fact that you're used to somebody telling you that on a regular basis is kind of fucked up, but it's just something you get used to with this sort of stuff. After I posted that comic, I was expecting to get a bunch of Reddit cares. Nobody sent them. So I think they took the message. I don't get the Reddit cares one as much as I used to, which, that's good. That's down to just like maybe once or twice a month now. Before I was getting it like once or twice a week. So that's an improvement.
Luckily, it's more a case of vocal minority. Artists are usually the most open to people from different walks of life. Most artists. And when I interviewed Sundblad, she said her comics actually receive plenty of positive feedback, both from the LGBT community and general audiences.
Trans things themselves aren't what I receive blowback about, because most of the time people are very excited to see that. They like to see different perspectives, or a lot of trans people just like to see some amount of representation. I think Tiff and Eve really appeals to them because, unlike many other trans comics that tend to get posted and shared around, Tiff is trans and is just a character. And while, trans topics come up for her, it's never the main focus of the comic. It is something I'm very proud of.
Unfortunately, Common was a comic in response to inevitable drama that came from the usual crowd. It was, unfortunately, kind of inevitable. It was only a sign of what was to come. She had barely made it 15 more comics before the next big thing hit her like a mallet to the face.
I should jump back to the violence I'd mentioned before, because there's one comic in particular. It was the last one of the series where Eve gets a hammer. Hammer Time. Hammer Time Part 4. Eve is passing this guy holding a sign that says God hates pigs. There's another YouTube strike for you. And screaming a bunch of bullshit. Which, incidentally, I took all of those screaming points he has are taken from the website Return of Kings, which is now a thankfully defunct alt-right site. That's where all of that comes from. But Eve is listening to him, hears him say something about the Hammer of Justice, and she's holding her big off mallet named She-Ra, and she turns and starts walking towards him, She-Ra raised. Actually, that is the only comic for a short amount of time I had that was removed. Reddit. If you're going to bring religion into any comic, this has always been the case. From newspaper comic strips to webcomics, if you're going to bring in religion, you're going to get a lot of people irritated. And because I had the trans flag in there too, because I put that into every title, that seemed to anger quite a few people. I think I got at least 2 Reddit cares messages for that one.
In this arc, Eve first gets her hammer, She-Ra. I mentioned in my first video that between Tiff and Eve, Eve was the much more passionate and impulsive one.
And I'm still the wild card, so that's good. No.
Eve has a vigilante mindset sometimes. If something feels right to her, she's gonna do it. If some guy on a street corner is spouting a bunch of hateful messages, it makes her just wanna... Then she's gonna pick a fight. And that's exactly what she does in Hammer Time Part 4. The short arc is mostly just for fun cartoonish gags. Eve builds herself a wooden mallet, a staple weapon of any Bugs Bunny or Spider Pig. seriously, the way she just whips it out of nowhere sometimes, Eve canonically stores She-Ra in hammer space.
It'll fit in your pocket.
But the Looney Tunes violence took on a different meaning when it hit closer to home. No pun intended.
I originally made number 4 as the second strip. It was going to be Eve walking home with the hammer because she hadn't quite decided what she's going to do with it next in the first one. She was just happy to have the hammer. And that was supposed to inspire her. But then after finishing all 4 of them, I went, this would make way more sense if it went at the end. What am I thinking? But that irked a lot of people. Some people interpreted it as a hateful message towards anything religious. At least based on some replies I got. That comic in particular, that was posted on a Friday because I knew that some violence would irk people even if there isn't any actual violence being shown. And Fridays tended to be my worst day, so I figured release it on a Friday, that way it'd leave the slot for another comic that might do better.
And that was that. Sundblad finished the comic, posted it, and planned to never think about it again. After all, she didn't even show any violence, cartoon or otherwise. Imagine her shock when this comic was removed from the R-Comic subreddit.
That comic, when I woke up Saturday morning, was no longer accessible. It had been flagged for hate speech by the admin, which I wasn't expecting. I didn't know that could even happen. Maurice Comics that Saturday happened to be having a strip that involved Maurice the Beaver punching Adolf Hitler in the face. And under Maurice's comic, I left a comment that said, hey, be careful with this. I made a comic about beating up a Nazi earlier, and mine's gotten removed. A mod saw that and contacted me and said that they're going to try to get it unremoved. Let me just say that I love the R-Comics moderation team. I have never had a bad experience with them, and they have been very quick to respond to anything I've sent them. I just appreciate the hell out of them. That comic got put back up.
Sundblad expected the transphobia. If you're going to be a public figure, let alone a public figure from any minority group, you unfortunately have to accept that there's going to be a lot of hate thrown your way. But having one of her comics cause such an issue that gets it completely removed, this situation was unexpected. On the plus side though, she had people in her corner, support from fans, Reddit mods, but she had attracted the attention of a new supporter, one that is a very controversial figure all on his own.
But what was notable about the experience is that caught Victor Gnarly's attention. For some reason, at the time, he was in this mood for cartoon violence and wanted to try and get a collaboration going that would involve Eve's mallet and maybe a couple other comic artists on the sub. That didn't end up happening.
It's probably for the best. Depicting even off-panel violence had gotten her into this mess, and an entire collab about it with easily the most controversial figure on R-Comics, I'd probably have a whole other section to this video. Then again, if it did happen, it probably wouldn't change much, because it was barely another 15 comics before the very fate of Tiff Eve's future would be thrown into question.
There'd be violence in some Tiff Eve strips before Tiff Eve was properly popular, and what would just happen is no one would see it, because you'd get a couple angry comments about it, and it would probably peter out below 50 upvotes. But the Hammer one hit 2,000.
What she's saying about attention is completely true. If James McNobody makes an account and immediately posts the first issue of his webcomic, Steve the Racist, no one is gonna care. No one is gonna react. If, like, Pizza Cake posted that, it'd be a much bigger problem.
So before, typically if I had violence in a strip, just wouldn't go very far. This time it went far, and that got quite a few eyes on it, and that got a few angry messages from me, from people claiming to be offended by the violence, when I had my suspicions it was a little more than that.
That said, it's probably for the best that Sundblad's older comic, Spandau Chalet, came out before Tiff Eve. I talked about it a little in our first video, but I glossed over a good amount of it because, well, discussing prisoners from the Third Reich for too long in the more lighthearted video felt, I don't know. She had always enjoyed dealing with more intense topics in her comics, like having death as a roommate or having a cast of Nazi prisoners as the main characters. If you followed Sundblad's lesser-known comics or watched my previous video about her, then you'll know about the Spandau Chalet. The name is a play on Spandau Ballet, a band from the 80s and part of the Second British Invasion. No, don't worry, you're not forgetting any major history event. It was the second wave of British musicians in the United States, after the likes of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Sundblad got the idea from a joke in the Let's Drown Out podcast.
The two sitcom ideas that we were nodding about.
Oh, that was on the Manhunter video, remember?
Was it?
We had the idea for the sitcom of the...
That was the Spandau prison one.
Oh yeah, we had an idea for a sitcom set in Spandau prison. Because I was reading up on that. And
It's an interesting thing.
I think it's a really interesting story. Just all the like former Nazi generals just living together and getting on each other's nerves.
Yeah, and
the
one who's meant to be...
Yeah, the guy who was supposed to be Rudolf Hess was actually just a backpacker.
like a clearly 21-year-old American backpacker.
And all the like, old Nazi generals were all senile, so they just go, "Oh, Rudolf, you're such a joker." But, I wonder if that's one of those one-joke concepts. Well, like the shock humor is, haha, we made a sitcom based set in Spandau prison.
Well, it depends.
Can we make 6 episodes out of that? Not really.
Yeah.
I just thought of a title for it as well. We could have called it the Spandau Chalet.
Okay, now you've just pushed it into one-off joke territory.
I suppose.
that just killed it.
Apparently, it's a concept you can run for at least 3 years. And the podcast has managed to worm its way into several of her comics, including Tiff Eve. Like, so many. While the very premise of that comic is enough to be controversial, it flew far enough under the radar to avoid the ire of the internet. But after Sundblad uploaded the 101st Tiff Eve comic, there was no hiding from what was to come, even with her strategy of trying to keep it on the down low by posting it on a Friday.
So, watch it. Tiff Eve at the time was growing in popularity. I wouldn't say it was popular yet. This one was actually a very important strip in Tiff Eve. I had an idea for a series that wouldn't just be a whole contained week's worth of comics. The idea was I was going to spread the series throughout. I was going to involve somebody confronting Eve about her violent tendencies and her overprotectiveness of Tiff. Actually, in the original, I hadn't planned for Tiff to do the confrontation. I'd planned their mutual friend, Claire, to confront Eve about it. Give Claire, like, another dimension. I was going to start with the Watch It comic. Tiff's 5 o'clock shadow appears because she's still shaving, and a guy just refers to her as Guy, which freaks Tiff out and makes her want to leave, and irritates Eve to the point where she's implied to give him a German suplex and force him to apologize. Fairly obvious in the strip was that Tiff wasn't comfortable with what Eve had just done. I tried to make her body language express that with a little bit of shock and backing away slightly.
On that day, if you went to the r/comic subreddit and sorted by controversial, I can promise what you'd find at the top. Intentional or not, she didn't poke the bear. She drop-kicked it with this comic. The comic had a near 1-to-1 upvote to downvote ratio. Comments started pouring in. It wasn't long before Sundblad took notice.
I started becoming aware something was up when about an hour in, when I started getting comments and replies chiding me for the comic. That one caught a lot of attention on Reddit. And in this instant, it seemed people thought I was saying that it was okay to beat someone up for misgendering another person. I mean, it doesn't feel great when people think they know the message, or if they think there is a message, which was not at all the message. I wasn't even trying to have a message.
But it wasn't all misinterpretation. Sundblad admitted that some of the negative responses were warranted. She had messed up with the comic strip.
Part of the comments were angry about that. The other half of the comments were upset by Eve's line, "She's wearing a skirt, dumbass, she's a girl." That one is my bad. I'll admit, I didn't use the best phrasing for that. For someone running a trans comic, you thought you would have thought that I would have caught how that line could be interpreted. Some people were taking it as me saying, if you're wearing a skirt, you're a girl, or that you can't be a girl unless you're wearing a skirt, which was not at all the intention. All that line existed for was Eve to point out something feminine about Tiff, to make it obvious that Tiff identifies as a woman. And between the long hair or eyelashes, had I thought ahead about it, I would have had Eve's line be, look at her dumbass, she's obviously a girl, something like that.
Comments continued to pour in. As it stands, the post has more than 800 comments, way more than Sundblad was used to. If you scroll through them, you'll see the myriad of issues people had with the comic. But if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll find a comment with more than 150 downvotes. And it's Sundblad's own comment.
It didn't help that my comment was slightly antagonistic that day. I said something along the lines of, can't wait to get half dozen comments from a bunch of idiots, which was pretty out of character for me. For a while I thought, you know what, I'm going to try playing that up too. Maybe that'll increase engagement. That worked too well. You know, when you're going to be posting these comics, you want to have a comment of your own, just giving your links or whatever, maybe cracking wise a little bit. And I think it was the idiots parts that some people over the edge, because they thought I was calling my critics idiots, when what I meant was people who thought I was advocating for violence, which is not what I was trying to do.
Yeah, that day of all days, Sundblad decided to take a page out of her fellow artists' books. Many online artists reply with snarky remarks or make very pointed comments, and between talking with Victor Gnarly and observing others' replies, she said, "What the hell?" And she just happened to say it at the worst possible time in her career. With that fuel on the fire, things were already wildly out of Sundblad's control. In Hollering Elk's words, this was her scandal. People were turning against Tiff Eve in droves. Things were already out of Sundblad's hands, but she couldn't just sit back and do nothing. She left one other comment to try and douse the flames, but it did very little.
The other comment I made under that was me trying to explain that Tiff and Eve are characters, and as characters, although they are based on me, I'm not advocating for violence here. These are just characters who make their own decisions, and some oftentimes contrary to mine. So when I explained that, that's when somebody else responded, chiding me about referring to my critics as idiots, and that's what made me realize that, okay, I shouldn't be arguing this. I shouldn't be arguing with these people. They're having an emotional reaction to this, and nothing I say is going to quell their issues.
There was no fighting it. This comic touched a nerve, and there was no untouching it. Why did I write? What the hell is that? What the hell is that metaphor? This comic was a sinking ship, and Sundblad was just hoping that she could escape to continue the series and put this mess behind her. But it was just getting worse. Comments started popping up on other completely unrelated Tiff and Eve posts.
So I stopped reading comments after the second hour because I could see nothing was going to come from this. I was starting to get comments on other posts, on other subreddits. People were messaging me, some saying to ignore all the negative comments, the others asking me where I got the balls to make this kind of a comic and where I thought it was getting off.
As Friday came to a close and the weekend rolled in, Sundblad sat with this disaster still burning right in front of her. There was no saving the Watch It comic. All she could do was move forward and take the next step. But after all that, what should her next step possibly be?
I had the entire weekend to stew over it. I was getting those constant pings, and I was ignoring them. And once again, I had expected it not to do well, but I was not expecting backlash on this kind of a scale. I had another comic planned for Monday. Because of the backlash, I was not in a great state at that point, and the response I was getting made me not want to do the next strip.
She decided that the best course of action was to scuttle the ship. The response was so toxic and vile that she would simply cancel that arc and go ahead with less provocative Tiff and Eve stories, hoping, praying that people would just chalk it up to a one-off sour note. It was a pretty massive gamble, considering how people get blasted for ignoring allegations and controversies all the time. More than anything, it usually makes things worse. But that was her call. The Aftermath comic was already finished, but no one would ever see them. Well, no one except for a few trusted friends.
When I made that decision to end the arc, I'd been talking with Victor Gnarly for quite a while after our collab, like regularly. On a daily basis, he and I were chatting. I sent it to Vic telling him, hey, I think I'm just going to drop the storyline I had planned, so you get to see the next strip because no one else will. And I sent him the Aftermath comic as a way of saying, so this is what I had planned, not going to be doing it anymore, so I thought I might as well show you. He read it and implored me to go on with the arc, but instead of what I had planned, which would be over the series of several weeks of more incidents coming up, he said that I should just have the next few strips planned out and post them sequentially. And that was a much better plan. I was still feeling iffy about it because I was just shook up a bit. I'm glad he convinced me because he honestly probably saved Tiff and Eve by telling me to run the next one, which was Aftermath Part 1. Honestly, I'm not sure if my original plan would have gone over well, but this was really good advice on his part. And if I hadn't done that, I'm not entirely sure if Tiff and Eve, would still be around.
In the midst of all the controversy, all the drama, one of the most controversial figures in the Reddit webcomics community stepped forward with a plan to save Tiff and Eve, a series that has come to mean so much to so many people. But they knew Gnarly's plan wasn't a guaranteed recipe for success. The internet hordes could double down, accuse her of backtracking. What other options did she have, though? This was her best bet to get Tiff and Eve out the other side.
With Aftermath Part 1 already made, I hurriedly made what were supposed to be the last 3, but I only ended up posting 2 of them, which were Aftermath Parts 2 and Part 3, which is basically an abridgment of what I originally had planned. Aftermath Part 1, 2, and 3 start coming out the next week, and that maintains people's attention, and they realize that there is more to this than Eve just going ahead and beating up some guy at a bar. So then throughout the week, people are speculating if I was walking something back or what have you. There was supposed to be 4 parts of Aftermath, but after Aftermath Part 3, which showed Tiff and Eve reaching some kind of resolution, there was supposed to be a comic where Eve is visited by 2 cops inquiring about the events of the night before. I thought it was actually pretty funny and wasn't anything serious. It was just dumb cops, and Eve somehow manages to get away with this.
So yeah, here's some never before publicly released content for you guys. Things were cooling down, but Sundblad and Tiff and Eve weren't out of the woods yet. Because after the emotional response dies down, that's when the unfounded speculations begin. You've seen it happen. A celebrity or internet personality has something come out about them, and within a week, you're seeing people claiming that they eat babies or something. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but even as Sundblad dripped out the Aftermath comics, she found herself on the receiving end of this weird internet speculation.
The entire week had just beaten me. Because if I recall, in Aftermath Part 3, there were even some commenters who were speculating even if I was even trans or not. And that pissed me off. Because from all of the harassment I had raked up for myself over the past week, I had had enough of it. So I had a comic that I'd been holding on to for a while. It was Aw Shoot. Because I knew it was not up to standard. I was hoping it would get some attention off of me after that whole week. And I was right. The comic did poorly, and I had a break that day.
From 800 comments down to merely 3, with 2 of them being an automatic response and Sundblad's own comment, Aw Shoot barely registered on people's radars. It wasn't an all-time low for Tiff and Eve, but it was certainly down there. Had all this controversy really taken that much of a toll? Were we seeing the beginning of the end of Tiff and Eve? Well, obviously not, otherwise I wouldn't be making a video about it. Skip forward another 15 comics, and you'll find that Sundblad was tackling her biggest project yet for Tiff and Eve, a 15-part saga about Tiff facing her family members at a wedding. Yet another touchy topic, and it went over well. In another 15 comics or so, Fran was posting a subscriber milestone comic, and it wouldn't be long before she conquered several more. Tiff Eve rebounded from its scandal. Overall, a happy ending to this story.
Another happy landing.
But that doesn't mean it's going to be smooth sailing forever. Its humor and messages are always going to be held to a different standard. Whether it should or shouldn't be that way, you could probably write a 50-page dissertation about that topic. But Fran as an artist and Tiff Eve have proved that they have staying power to tackle any spicy drama that happens to come up. So, thanks for— Wait! I have one more thing to say. Fran and I weren't just teaming up for these 2 videos and a couple comic collabs, we're gonna be streamers. Not that kind of streamer. Good lord, I hope not that kind of streamer. And our first one is going to be Sunday, July 14th, right here on this channel. So if you've got any burning questions for either of us, or just want to hang out and see the inevitable chaos and growing pains of new streamers, make sure you subscribe and check back here. Or if you're watching this in the future, go back and watch it. I'm sure nothing went horrifically wrong.